All right, in this video, I'm going to be showing you some kind of MacGyver dentistry that is pretty cool. The reason I'm having to do this is we had a case, and I've actually posted a video on this relatively recently. We did an all-on-4 on this patient, and here you can see the implant positions. And so, the plan for this patient was we were going to do an all-on-X and place these 4 implants, which we did, and made a surgical guide for it. I'll show the surgical guide here real quick. And so when we did the case, we just pulled those teeth, and this was simply a bone supported guide. And the surgery went great, with exception of one thing. This particular implant right here, so it made a lot of sense to go with this position, this is her original CT, and you can see she's already a dentulous in that area. And with this all-on-4 configuration, we wanted to get some implants as far anterior as possible. And this allowed us to get basically the lateral sites, which were already edentulous. But you can kind of appreciate, if you really look closely here, that this bone is just not the greatest quality. Can you see how porous this is? It's very dark compared to, like, say, the cancellous bone over here or in the other side. And so if you look at it from a lateral view, you can again see this has got a great cortex, which is awesome, but the internal bone, the cancellous bone, is just very poor quality. So when we did this surgery, we undersized it really a lot. I mean, we only went up to, I think, either a 2 or a 2.5 drill. And even still, the insertion torque was not ideal. It was just on the borderline of should we include it, should we not? And since we got such great stability on the others, we did decide to include it. In hindsight, that was probably the bad decision because what's happened in the meantime? So we placed those implants. We did a conversion prosthesis, which you can see right here, and designed that to be direct to MUA with vortex screws. Um, I left the connectors somewhat thin. So she ended up breaking this about 2.5 weeks out. And so when she came into the clinic, they removed the temp and discovered that this implant was failing. That was the one that we didn't have the ideal insertion torque on. And so this is a crappy situation because, the old adage, all on 4, but none on 3. Well, we can't just stick her back in a temporary, leaving this kind of a span. So we're left with the decision, do we either take the MUAs off and just bury these implants and live to fight another day? Or could we potentially place an implant to either side of this to get some more anchorage there to reduce that cantilever length? And that's what we're attempting to do. So it's probably a blessing in disguise that she ended up breaking this because we are discovering this, before she's waited for 3 months, and now we just have, 3 implants and still can't go to a definitive prosthesis. So uh, sometimes little bummer things like that, they're not always the worst case scenario. So what I'm going to show is, okay, let's talk about if you wanted to make a surgical guide to place these implants. So this is my thought. I've basically placed an implant to either side of this one in where the teeth previously were. And so this being now, it's going to be 3 weeks out probably when they do this. Hopefully the bone has begun to fill in a little bit. Hopefully by placing a large implant, we can get enough bite that we can immediate load this because bone is kind of like muscle in that it responds and matures based on the forces exerted on it. So in those socket sites, you're going to have a good uh, boundary of cortical bone in the socket, and hopefully it's going to be more mature and better quality bone around that. But back to the issue, like we'd like to make a guide. I mean, you could freehand that. There's no problem with that. But like if you were to go in the canine side, for example, it is pretty difficult. Imagine she's edentulous now, and you flap everything open, and you're freehanding this, trying to thread the needle and not hit this disto-angled implant. That's a challenge, right? And so I'd like, if we can, to make a surgical guide that will let us place these 2 implants. So that's the challenge that we're dealing with. Now, the question becomes, okay, how do we make a guide? Well, I don't have necessarily a model that has the MUA still on these three implants that we're going to be leaving. And, do we really want to flap her wide open again to make a bone supported guide? I wouldn't really trust a soft tissue guide here. And furthermore, I don't have a soft tissue digital model. So how could we make a guide for this? Well, what do we have? Well, we made this conversion prosthesis, right? This is using vortex screws to screw into the implants. And again, this is the one that we're losing. And so I could actually just repurpose this and make a screw in surgical guide. All right. Now, how would you do that? Well, I want you to think about if you were doing a soft tissue guide. Let's imagine patient's edentulous, and you were going to make a surgical guide that just goes on their soft tissue and fits like a denture, right? How do you do that? Well, you would do a dual scan where you CT scan the patient wearing the denture and then CT scan the denture by itself. And what Blue Sky Plan lets you do is generate an STL of their denture, which is stitched in position, right? And then you would just plan your implants, and then when you were ready to make the guide, you would turn your tubes on, you choose Maxilla, and then in this drop down menu, you would select that denture STL. And instead of like drawing a guide outline and everything, you would simply push create scan appliance guide. And all that does is that duplicates that denture, but it builds those two tubes into that denture. All right. Well, that's essentially what I'm wanting to do here. I would like to be able to just reproduce this shape right here, which screws into those other three implants, but build in some tubes. So the software is dumb. It doesn't know the difference in a denture or any other STL, right? All it knows is you want this shape and you want to build in these two guide tubes. So that's what we're going to do. I've positioned those implants. Remember, that's coming out. And, we'll try to do one or the other of these sites or both. Your other option would be to enucleate the incisive canal and do one there, but that'll just be a free hand if they have to resort to that because you got to get in there with the curettes and everything to do that, and then you've already got a hole. All right, so we'll try to place one or both of these implants. So I've positioned my tubes. I've set these to do no guide tube sleeves. We're just going to go directly printed. So I've changed from the standard guide tube diameter that would be for a metal sleeve. I've changed that to 5.05, which is for the Blue Sky kit. The offset, if you were going to go without a sleeve, is 8.5. All right. And yet you notice here that I've got my offset set at 11.5. All right. Why is that? Well, this is the reason. When I did the 8.5, you can see that tube is buried up in the bone. It's impinging quite a bit. And so if you ever run into this scenario, I've got this is a 13 millimeter implant. So if I use the standard diameter, or I'm sorry, the standard offset for the surgical guide kit, then taking a 13 millimeter drill with this tube right here would make the apex end right there. Okay, but I need to raise the tube up. Well, you can certainly do that. And this is the case with any keyless system. Basically, for every millimeter you raise the tube up beyond what the offset is for that kit, you're effectively shortening your drill. And so again, this is a 13. What's my next drill available? Or I'm sorry, my next implant available in Blue Sky is a 16. So I could hypothetically just raise this tube from 8.5, add 3 millimeters, which would make it 11.5. And that way, instead of using the 13 millimeter drill to get to this depth, now I can just use the 16 millimeter drill to get to that depth. So that's all I've done is I've just raised that to 11.5 just to get it up and out of the bone. And now let's make the guide. I'll go to the guide panel. Remember, you've got to choose what model is it you're wanting to build guide tubes into. Well, it's the conversion prosthesis here. And so with that done, all I need to do now is push create scan appliance guide. So now you see that that was really, really quick. All that the software did is duplicate that FP1 prosthesis, and it just built in the guide tube. So I'm going to hide the original prosthesis. And now you see I have a surgical guide. It's the exact same screw hole position. So he'll be able to simply screw this guide in on these three implants, and that's going to very uh, rigidly fixate this surgical guide. I actually think this is like the best case scenario for a surgical guide because it is going to be so stable, absolutely no movement. It's just going to be a really nice option. So, I hate that we're having to do this, but it's also an opportunity to show something cool and hopefully show you an option if you ever run into such a scenario, which you will. This is something that you could do. And then once we have this shape, if you have some little bits you want to cut off like that, I could simply use the cut tool and cut that off. If you, for example, that's going to be obviously a weak point in the guide, and I don't think it'd be an issue, but if we wanted to get rid of that hole, because again, that implant's lost, we could do that in the Model Master. And so in Model Master, if you go to Model Editing, you're going to have these selection brushes. All right. So what if I came in here and using the brush, you can hold shift and scroll upward and it'll make your spot size bigger. But now holding shift, I'm going to just outline this hole. And I'm also going to do that from the bottom. All right, so with that done, I can simply go to cut that selected area. I do have some little floating bits and pieces in there that we could get rid of. That's in your surfaces panel. I can go here, choose that model and say isolate, and let's just touch the spot that we want to keep. So now that's gotten rid of that, but we need to fill those holes in. All right. In the model editing, you can go to select holes manually, and that one, and this one. Actually, let's just go select all holes because that's the only two holes we've got. And so with that done, I can simply say close selected holes. All right, so now that's filled in. And then if you had anywhere else that you were concerned about, let's say you wanted to bulk it up in some spots because you feel like it might be a little too thin, like right here, that's definitely a potential risk because we already had a relatively thin connector, and now it's cut away this to get your drills and stuff in there. So I could go in here and use maybe a add and remove brush and simply add material, bulk that up where it's going to be stronger and I don't have to worry about this breaking. Got a smoothing brush. All right. And you could just smooth some material down from the sides and bring that in. You've also got the option to use your local deform tool, which is right here. And that lets you just simply drag an area up of whatever spot size you have. So I'm going to go with a bigger diameter spot size. And I'm just going to take this up some. All right. And so you can just simply play with this until you feel like you've got your dimensions where everything is strong enough. There's no reason you even have to keep this shape. It's just that this was really convenient. It already has the screw-in holes. Um, so you could reshape on this as much as you want, but there's no reason to. This is going to fit just like our temp, screw into place, and after that implant's gone, we can drill these osteotomies and then place an implant in one or both of those sites and hopefully carry on. That'll require a new scan to make a new temporary or an impression, whichever one you were doing. But anyway, that was the idea with this case, and hopefully that gives you some ideas if you ever run into something like this in the future and you kind of got to do a bailout. This is an option for you. All right, so hopefully you found that helpful. We'll see you later.